So Miguel and Damien Delaney are both here. Like last time, unfortunately, John can't make it a hat-trick, so we have 2/3 of our dream dinner party. You're both very welcome. Hey, fellas.
Not too bad. Although, again, to start this on John, there was someone that looks very like him seemed to be at the game last night.
Did see that. I did see that.
I'm in Bilbao. Haven't come across him.
Okay. The less said about Damien Delaney's dream dinner party, the better. The internet never forgets that one. We get an email in about every 6 weeks going, have you guys ever seen this thing, Damien Delaney? We said, listen, we're not going to go there with him. Spursy and all this, fellas, they get it done. There's redemption for Ange. Ultra pragmatic Spurs, Damien.
Yeah, I love it. Absolutely love it. I thought they deserved it. They were the better team on the night. They were more organised. They looked like they had more verve about them. That's just on the night last night. But overall, I woke up this morning, I was thinking about it for a while. I'm actually really, really pleased with Spurs. Like, genuinely, the club, for Ange, and for the staff there as well. The club have obviously been ridiculed a lot, with the whole 3-point lane carry on and trophies and obviously the famous Antonio Conte speech of this is the history of Spurs. Those fans have had to endure an awful lot. So I'm really pleased that they got a major European trophy. They got Champions League next year. And I'm pleased for Ange. He was ridiculed equally for his second season comment. And I would imagine that if he didn't win last night, it would have been, ramped up times 100, I would imagine. So I'm pleased for him because he is an honest guy. He has his flaws. He's not perfect. But I think Spurs, of the two teams, Manchester United and Tottenham, Tottenham had a lot of injuries this year. They couldn't very rarely be able to field the strongest 11. It was a bit of a mix-up. And yes, I'm not saying Ange didn't get anything wrong. He did, absolutely. But it's a great end of season story for them, and it's a great story for football when you throw in Newcastle, Crystal Palace. There's hope for everybody, and I think that's what this season has done.
Yeah, Miguel, you were at the game. What did you make of it?
It was both a dreadful game and a very entertaining one. I think, and almost very entertaining. I have to say, I've never known. I know so much has been made. I've written about it. How there's never been a final where the two final. I've never been a European final where the two finalists have been so low in the league. That was already strange, and obviously there's their wealth compared to the rest of it. But also never been a final, I don't think, where the stakes were so extreme. And Damien's touched upon some of it there. Obviously, what it meant for Spurs and what it meant for Postecoglou, and it was interesting actually being there afterwards. So with United, I think, because they just win more trophies than Spurs, they've won 2 in the last 2 years. The entire game was put in the context of the financial meaning and what they can do going forward, the Champions League, how they need this, especially for Amorim. But what was really striking after the game was after all that talk, you could see the emotional cost. So Luke Shaw stopped in the mix zone, and as lads were saying, it looked like he was going to break down in tears. And he just the kind of stridency of his language. We have to ask ourselves whether some of us are good enough to be here. This club needs massive change. A lot of people just looked humiliated. Garnacho was coming out openly saying the season was shit, which I mean, strong was can't dispute it. And that's what I mean. I suppose the final being so binary, and for Spurs and Postecoglou, all of the noise this season, you can sort of forget it. Really, I mean, look, it might well be influential into the league next season, but it's a blank slate for them now, and with the kind of the optimism from actually winning a trophy. With United now, then the fallout actually from this could be unlike anything we've seen from a final in that regard, because it just how much it influences what the club can do going forward. I think a little bit about what it says about Amorim and his place in all this. But yeah, I mean, after all the financial talk, I think what was most striking was just the emotion. And United as a club now just look beaten. It's this. I know we've spoken over the last few years. They can't possibly go lower. This is it, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, I beg to differ, Miguel. I think there's a bit further to go yet. Because there's another thing. I thought a lot about this game last night, and just before we get on to it, I would like to echo what Miguel said there. It's so true. The game almost had a feel of a playoff final from the Championship, where it's make or break, because I've played in that playoff final, and if you win it, you're a Premier League player, your life changes. You don't, you're going back into the 46-game season. So there was that do or die element to the game. But I don't think Manchester United are done falling yet, for the very fact of the reason that a lot of the players are still contracted and they're still not going to shift them. That's the key problem that they have, is they need to shift players. If not, this slide is going to continue. They'll probably change manager because that's probably the cheapest thing to do. But there's 5 or 6 players there. It's amazing Luke Shaw coming out saying that, we have to question if some of us are good enough to play for Manchester United. He's been there for 11 years. 11 years. And 11 years staying there, he's questioning that. There's too many players at that club that are on salaries that they should never have been put on, and too many of them are not at the required level for Manchester United Football Club. And the problem is, how do you change that? The only way to change culture, the best way to change the culture of a football club is the players. And that might sound easy or cheap analysis. It's not. You have to change the players. The players are the ones that will set the culture. And there's too many players at Manchester United earning way too much money that they're never going to get elsewhere. And unless the club decide to write a check of 300, 400, 500 million to wipe that slate clean and write off all the debts, the money that's still owed on some of those transfers, they're going to be there again next year. And then all you're going to be doing is putting good players in with bad players, and that's why they've kind of fallen until where we are now.
We'll move on to United in detail in just 1 second, but just on Spurs. So, last night, it was an atrocious final, really, in terms of standard. There were times you were looking at it and just the ball was like a ping pong flying around. It was
maybe the goal.
Yeah, it was a goal befitting a terrible final. I don't even know if he scored it, but we'll let him have it. So they had 27% possession, Spurs. Their pass completion rate was 60%. This is chronic. Your five-a-side Astro, I was going to say Damien, yours probably a higher standard. Miguel, your five-a-side Astro has probably a 60% pass completion rate.
We're lucky.
Yeah, 115 passes in the game. 1 shot on target, and I'm not entirely convinced that was Johnson's. But nonetheless, they got it done, and there was a bravery and a commitment to how they played. But when you look at how they lined up, I guess, they had their back four, and they haven't had it often this season, in Porro and Ideologue, and they had Van de Ven and Romero with them. And he stuck 3 in midfield, Basuma and Sarr and Bentancur. But it was kind of interesting, Damien. When I saw the lineup pre-game, I thought, okay, this is kind of getting back to a familiar-ish Spurs lineup. And then what was so striking is Ideologue and Porro, they weren't doing that whole we're going into midfield thing. They were like, we're a Giovanni Trapattoni flat back four and we're digging in here. That was what was so striking about the Spurs approach.
Yeah, I was at the FA Cup final on Saturday with some ex-players, and a good friend of mine, Mile Jedinak, who's part of the Spurs team. So I sat next to him for the game, and I was kind of picking his brains about Wednesday night as much as you can. And he said to me with a real confidence, we've got too much for them. Not in the way that most coaches say, oh no, we're confident. And he explained a few things, and he said to me, look, we've got certain players fit, and we've got a game plan that we think is going to beat them. And obviously Van de Ven is one of them. Now, he didn't give me too much details, but he was obviously very, very confident that if you keep a solid shape against Manchester United, they will struggle to break you down. If the game gets into a basketball feel to it, where you attack, they attack, and it becomes a very broken game, and you leave spaces, they have got really good street footballers that can play off the cuff and can make something out of nothing. But if you present them with a certain set of problems, i.e. a solid block, they don't have the guile, the craft, the discipline to rotate and implement the patterns that you need to break down not a low block, but a solid block. And these were the things he was saying to me on Saturday, and it kind of came true the other night. And I must say, Vicario is a top class goalkeeper. The two centre backs are superb. When they're fit. When you can keep both of them on the pitch, one for injury, one for probably disciplinary reasons. But Van de Ven and Romero are pretty good. And I like Yves Bissouma in midfield. I think he's got a good work rate, a good work ethic. Sometimes he's probably overcommitted and he flies and he loses discipline. But Spurs were probably a better team last night. They were better shaped and better discipline. So they deserved it. And I suppose you got to give credit to Ange for compromising what he wants to do to get the final over the line, as opposed to Amorim, who just seems to be pig ignorant at the moment. Well, that's probably a bit harsh, but very, very, very stubborn. Yeah.
Miguel, what does this mean for Ange Postecoglou?
So I just obviously had to cover this morning. The last I heard, and just on what Damien said there, it's interesting about the Jedinak and his conviction, because I wrote on the eve of the final, I'd actually heard similar from Win Spurs. They were actually, despite everything, they went into this really thinking they were going to win. I didn't have the detail Damien did there, but there was a conviction about them. But that was only superseded my conviction about something else, which is that Postecoglou is going no matter what. Obviously, everyone knows they've been kind of looking at other managers, Marco Silva and Donny Areola, Thomas Frank's been mentioned. But just from speaking to people this morning, and like who were involved, they're saying a decision hasn't actually been made yet. And I think I think this has been a really interesting thing for a while. And again, there are echoes with Ten Hag. Like, as the season's going on and as there's bad results and like there's a bit of kind of like uncertainty about what next, it's very easy for people in hierarchies or people close to them who kind of have an idea what's going on and say, yeah, this is happening, he's going to go. But what was always hanging over it was in the emotion of victory, of a trophy like that, it does change things. Even like Daniel Levy is considered one of the most kind of like, in terms of making these decisions, he's able to cut out emotion more than anyone else. I actually would dispute that, I have to say, because I think he gets very hung up on the status of Spurs. Hence, he hasn't made actually calculated decisions in the past, like selling players like Dele Alli or Eriksson when Maurizio Pochettino wanted to. But I do think in this, then they could get swept away from the emotion. I'm not necessarily sure Postecoglou is right for what Spurs want to do going forward, but to agree with Damien there, I think he's earned his chance. Like that might be go against actually conventional thinking in football now, given what we saw with Ten Hag. But equally, there are moments when a manager stub him through. We saw it with the most famous, with Alex Ferguson, and when you get that with that bit of like confidence, it can change things. But I agree with Damien there. I think given that theme of Postecoglou's time in both England and Scotland, actually, because Celtic in Europe had similar issues or similar debates about how his football is naive. He refuses to compromise. Say, well, I mean, this was like an arch example of compromise. He was playing like Mourinho or really actually maybe Antonio Conte football in terms of how he was so willing to cut the team's cloth to whatever game they had. And as Damien said there about what Jedinak told him, that is a perfect example, this Manchester United game in this. And what he's basically just totally, he totally adapted the approach to beat specifically Manchester United.
Yeah. That does bring us to Amorim, Damien. So afterwards in his post-match press conference, he said that if the board spoke to him and said, listen, we think this isn't working out, he would walk away without looking for compensation, which is, I think in modern day football, fairly admirable line to take. But he said he was as committed as ever, and he finished it off by saying, and I'm not going to change. Yeah. So what we have reached a problem here, and you've alluded to it, both of you, whereby to change Manchester United from a playing personnel point of view to into a shape that would suit his style could take literally years, not least given, Champions League money up in smoke, and the market know how desperate United are. They're not going to get many good deals. And yet he's saying, I'm not changing. How can this continue?
Yeah, look, I think the manager has a duty to do what's best for the football club. In the short term and in the long term. I don't think you can write off. I saw a stat this morning, something online, and I never verified it, so I'm going to throw it out there. Manchester United had 30 points in December and have 39 now. Now, I think that might actually be true. I laughed as if it was a joke, but if that's true, that is a dereliction of duty from the manager. I mean, we all have our values and our principles and what we believe in. But you can write off half a season. You absolutely cannot at any football club, let alone on the side of Manchester United. So he has a responsibility to take care of the short-term future of the club, as well as keeping an eye on the mid and long-term future as well. You don't get a pass at any football club to do what he's done for the length of time that he's done it. I mean, if they go into the start of next year with him as manager and him in these principles, then, I mean, it is a dereliction of duty from the owners then as well. So what's the answer? Do you swap out the manager? Or if you keep him, I think you and me spoke about this briefly, Joe, that if they do it, Manchester United need to implement what I would call the nuclear option. And that is essentially take 6 players, right? I would say Luke Shaw, Casemiro, Harry Maguire, Rasmus Højlund, Mason Mount, and pull them all in the summer and say, look, guys, we're really, really sorry. You've done nothing wrong. You guys have just come in and did your best. We're not faulting you, but there's no future for you guys at this football club. And we would advise you to find another club. And then what you have to do then is create a separate training ground and say to those players, you're going to be in this part of the training ground and we're going to provide everything for you, training sessions, food. We're not going to, banish you. You will have training sessions, you will be kept fit, but, we're going to pay your wages, absolutely. But it's time for you guys to go and find a new football club. And then you implement youth team players, you have to move underage players, and then you try and find huge bargains on the continent or in the championship and rebuild the club that way. Because at the minute, there's no future for that football club with the current setup, with the squad that's there. It's going nowhere. It's bleak. At least with the nuclear option that I just mentioned, there's a future. At least then I think you will have hit rock bottom. You will have found bedrock. And it might be ugly for a couple of years, but at least it's ugly with a chance of a future. At least it's ugly with we're going to start moving in the right direction. Whereas if you carry on like this, it's not acceptable. And the club are just going to have to suffer those losses, and whatever money there might be a couple of million quid a week going out on wages on players that aren't part of the squad. But at least then you're going to sign players on good money or reasonable money. So the problem you have at Manchester, one of the big problems you have at Manchester United is if they want to sign, say, a centre back, right, and they say, look, we really like the centre back from Holland or wherever, the agent is going to say, okay, Harry Maguire is earning 250 grand a week. My guy's not signing for 70. That is just not happening, right? You can't put, an international side centre back in the changing room on 70 grand a week when, other players are earning in excess of 200. That's why, the whole Kobe Mainoo situation with, he's on 7 or 8 grand a week and they're looking for well over 100 because the Man United have created a pay structure. But what they'll do then, if they take that nuclear option I talk about, is when they go to sign a player, they can say, look, all those wages, those days are done. Okay, the new wage structure is this. So you're almost like cutting off the dead limbs on a tree, and you're saying that's not part of us anymore. That's not a wage structure. That's separate to what we're doing. And then you start, and at least then there's a future. But at the minute, I don't see the future. And if they really want to get serious about moving in the right direction, I think it's time to take that nuclear option.
Yeah, and so you're not a fan of the idea whereby they might say, well, look, the cheaper option and maybe the less severe one in the short term is they bin off Amorim, say, look, we just can't fund a transformation of the squad to fit with the type of football you want to play. It was our mistake. We should have realised this was not a goer if you were never going to change your approach. They bin off Amorim and they look for a manager who will play the type of football that will get the best out of that cohort that you've mentioned. And maybe they have a chance of scraping top 4. Do you think that's a viable plan?
No, I just think the time has come now, just to as I said, find bedrock, and just move on. And it's going to be expensive, and it's going to be. But I think the fans at Manchester United would row in behind that plan. I think they really would. I think they're just sick of watching what they're watching. There's no vision, there's no plan, there's no path. And then those players that are put to one side, then they have a decision to make. Do I just stay and rot in this far corner of the training ground, or do I say to my agent, look, let's just shake hands and we'll move on as well? And I think some of the players would do that. Okay. Some of them would say, that's fine, I'm going to write off my career and sit in this for 2 years. But I think that's the path.
Miguel, I saw in your piece on the Independent today that you said even Liverpool had looked at Amorim and thought he was a brilliant coach, but they figured they would have to spend hundreds of millions to shape the squad to suit his ideology. It's like, and that proved to be a fairly smart decision. Your sense of how Amorim plays out, how likely United are to take Damien's nuclear option, or what's going to happen here?
Well, I mean, right now all suggestions are that they're doubling down. And look, as I say in that piece as well, like Ratcliffe has spoken about this so much. Like he's almost kind of cornered himself, and actually in a few ways because it's financial as well. And it's funny just on what Damien's saying there about kind of the nuclear option, because I kind of touched on that towards the end of the piece as well. I was talking to a chief executive at another club after the game last night who has kind of worked with a few people at United, and they were raising exactly that point. I mean, look, and there is a comparison. People can maybe laugh at Arsenal this season, or no, they have provoked a lot of kind of jokes and discussion that way, and there's been debate about whether Arteta can take them to the next level, but Arsenal basically went from a basket case and a similar kind of banter club, if you like, to challengers for the title, Champions League semi-finalists. By exactly that, they've actually made a sort of a kind of a counterintuitive investments by being willing to basically just get rid of the wages of Mesut Ozil and Aubameyang and players like that, change the dressing room, and they really kind of doubled down on exactly that, young players. And the point the executive made to me is, and it touches on what Damien was saying, the only way you change a culture, especially one that's as toxic as United, is and rebuild a proper connection with the fans is get in young players who aren't there isn't that perception that they're overpaid. They don't have baggage. They come in and they're hungry. And again, as Damien says, it might lead to a lot of inconsistency, some pain, but at least there's hope for the future. And if you're going to spend, complement that with leaders rather than necessarily elite players. It's what you need for the moment, and it's why some of the United's business already I do actually find a little bit surprising. I mean, 2 months ago, Ratcliffe gave an interview where he was talking about how Manchester United missed a data revolution in football, and he pointed like kind of Brentford and Brighton. And now this summer, which is the first major summer under Amorim, which is supposed to be kind of like almost a blank slate summer to start again, their main targets are Cunha and Delap, both good players, both who could do well. But like, I mean, you don't exactly need scouting to go and look, well, they might suit Manchester United.
No.
You don't need data for that. And as a consequence, they're very expensive. So that already feels a little bit strange in that sense, especially given how limited their budget is. And just on the question you actually asked, like I think Amorim's clearly, as given we saw what he did at Sporting. A lot of major clubs liked him before United appointed him. Liverpool one, Barcelona, and City others. I think there's clearly a bright coach in there, but it does feel like right now, especially at United, he needs perfect conditions or close to perfect conditions to succeed. And United won't be able to give him that for some time. And the road there could be difficult. And it's like from talking to people last night after the game, there were two things as well that are a bit alarming, I think, that I put in that piece. One was detail I was given about the program in January. So this was the first time that Amorim come in, and finally they had a bit of a break between games. And there was a bit of surprise that he was doing what was like described to me as, I'm sure Damien's more familiar with all his terminology. And it was 5-day lead into games. It was 4 consecutive days, whether doing like endurance work or strength work. And like the way this was put to me was, it was the type of approach that that can work very well if you're one of the big three in Portugal, when half your games are against, in clubs you should beat regardless, and you run about 10 kilometers less a match. But is a bit antithetical to English culture. Is kind of, it's in the intensity of the Premier League, and in that situation, apparently according to UEFA studies, it does increase injury risk. And then the second one that was put to me about this was that it's not just a case of playing three at the back. His specific, and I'd be interested in what Damien thinks it is, that his specific interpretation of three at the back, and this is where we get into details that are kind of, I suppose, beyond some journalists like myself, but his specific interpretation has worked in Portugal, in Italy. It exists in Portugal and Italy, and that's it. It hasn't really spread around the rest of Europe and remains untested in England. And as put to me, it can work, but it needs a lot of support that Manchester United might necessarily be able to actually offer in the immediate future.
Okay. Anything there, Damien, jump out?
Yeah, listen, you and me did the whole 3-5-2 thing there a while back, and that's why it doesn't work. That's like, I always think 3-5-2 is a possession-based system. So you have to retain possession to allow your wing backs transition out of a flat back five into higher up the pitch. In the Premier League, the ball turns over regularly. And I tell you, the difference between the Premier League and continental football is, on the continent, when the ball turns over, a lot of the teams, their first thought is retain possession, right? Keep the ball, because they've had it for a bit. We've won it back. So come out, let's set up our patterns of play. Let's let everybody get set, and then we'll go run through our things. What makes the Premier League so brilliant is that when the ball turns over, they go for the jugular. They're not worried about possession in a lot of teams, especially mid to lower team tables. They're praying for those transition moments. And when that ball turns over, the opposition are in a very, very vulnerable spot. And if you can set up right and you can spin, it doesn't have to be good balls. A lot of the balls could be blind, because your coach will be telling you, in possession, he's in this position. So when the ball turns over, he can't be in this channel. So let's just spin those balls down there. So that's why Man United get hurt so much on the transition and turnover. So listen, if you remember the year Sheffield United came up to the Premier League, they played a kind of a a new age 3-5-2 version of it. And remember the first year they done really, really well, and everyone was like, amazed at how good they were. But then when someone figures it out, once one team figures it out, and I always say that about the Premier League, it is a copycat league. That once one team figures out what the other opposition are doing, then everyone else just does it. Because someone will find, these teams are 5, 6, 7 analysts, boring over data on weak spots in formations. So I just don't think that 3-5-2 is an amazing system. It can work. Inter Milan are obviously the biggest proponents of it. But unless you have Denzel Dumfries and you have DeMarco, who you don't need to retain possession, you can just fire into Lautaro Martinez in the 10 position, and those two can go from one 18-yard box to the other in about 3 seconds. And that's how they transition.
Yeah, so then you really have to revisit, is Amorim actually a good manager? So he's got this one system which works, but even if it works, other analysts will find a way around it eventually. But it works, say it works, and he takes this job where he really should have recognised that the squad available to him wasn't going to be able to implement it. I know he wanted to wait until the summer to join. He took the job nonetheless, so that's a questionable decision. So the suspicion everyone has is the squad isn't going to be able to implement this system. He joins anyway, he tries this system, it doesn't work, he keeps trying it. He says over and over again he'll never change no matter what, he'll never adapt no matter what. He keeps trying it. Doesn't seem to get any better. There's no refinements. There's no sign of this team, they're getting to grips with it. They're starting to, little tweaks here and there. It's really starting to come together. There's none of that. And so it's just like a kamikaze mission. That is absolutely astonishingly bad management. What is that?
They'll never get to grips with it because they don't have the physical capabilities, the players. Each position in that system, you need a certain set of physical requirements in terms of being able to cover distances, to be able to carry top end speed for a certain amount of time in the games, to be able to put in 1,500 meters of high intensity running, which is running at 7 meters plus a second. This is what the data revolution that Miguel is talking about. That they have these data on players. I don't think any of them can, if you want to play that system with Casemiro and Bruno Fernandes in the middle of the park, good luck. Honestly, Casemiro again was treading water. It's not his fault. He's just old. It was a poor signing and he's on astronomical wages. But listen, I've said this to you before, Joe. I think it's the reason Dan Ashworth left the football club, because Dan Ashworth came into Manchester United and he was probably putting together a plan for that he would have sat down with Jim Ratcliffe, Sir Dave Brailsford, and said to themselves, okay, what do Manchester United want to be? What do they want to show to the world? And Man United and the ownership would have said, well, this is what we want. And Dan Ashworth would have went away and start building a database of players, and they would have had a kind of an evolutionary approach where we can kind of maybe marry up some of these players whilst getting others. And it might take 6 transfer windows, but we're going to get there. And then I'd say out of nowhere, Dan Ashworth got a phone call saying, Ruben Amorim. And Ashworth would have said, hang on a second, we need 6 new players in the next 2 windows. If you go get Ruben Amorim, we need 16.
Yeah.
Because none of our squad, I'd say 1 or 2 of our squad could potentially play in that system. And I'd say that's where they came to blows, and whether he left, whether he walked, whether he was pushed. But you don't pay that amount of money for a director of football and then go above his head or go around him. And somebody has sold that dream to Manchester United, and they've just done, oh no, we're going for Ruben Amorim. And I would imagine that is a catastrophic mistake, and that's why Dan Ashworth isn't at the football club. And that's why Manchester United are lost.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
There's a very interesting...
Go on, sorry, Miguel, jump in, yeah.
Just on that, exactly, just from what people have told me about how United work. So much has been made of, say, this team of executives and leadership that Ratcliffe has put together. And when you talk to people about how it's the elite clubs are run, and when they do enjoy these years of success, usually it's because there's a clear structure. People are empowered in the jobs they do. Say, for example, Cheeky Begiristain at Manchester City, or any similar figure at the best run clubs. Where what's been put to be at Manchester United, despite all these high profile appointments, and the Ashworth case, I think, is very illustrative. Everyone is second guessing themselves because they're thinking about, they're second guessing what Ratcliffe is going to think. So rather than every decision being made for what is just on its own the best for the football club, so every decision is made in the context of what Ratcliffe might want, because ultimately, he's got the final say.
Yeah.
And just from comparing what I've heard about that to how recent European champions are run, that doesn't necessarily sound like the most optimistic way to run a football club.
It's dysfunctional. But I do have to bring it back to Amorim, though, a second here. He looked at the squad, he took the job, he's trying to implement the system. It's patently not working. He has access to all of the information I'm sure Damien has, and he's just persevering with it. Didn't even change it to like win one cup final, which had such huge consequences last night. Said in his post-match interview, and I'm never changing it. Like, sorry, what is this that you can't adapt? Like, that is just insanity. Like, this is like some primitive AI, and if the perfect conditions aren't there, as you said, Miguel, it just malfunctions. Like, this is all I can do. I can do this exact thing with these exact parts, and if anything else happens, well, it's not my fault because I'm sticking to my principles, as if that's kind of, dressed up in some kind of noble, well, what a real ideologue, something to be admired. It's not. Like, Ferguson, I hate bringing it back to Ferguson, but it's United. It's hard not to. But like, put him in a street fight. He'll find whatever weapon he needs to win that street fight, and he'll build from there.
Well, I mean, also he didn't change, like, whatever about changing his system from game to game or kind of adapting. He didn't even change it really in this game until the 70th minute. So it was this kind of wasted formation that he persisted with, and like, because I do think for all we're talking about Spurs' resilience, and it is there. There was also a sense anytime the ball went into the box, it was pandemonium. The one thing, I mean, we're talking about lack of quality in the final. I do think Van de Ven and Romero were excellent. And like Van de Ven's clearance off the line kind of, personified the performance in a few ways. But yeah, like there was a chance there for United had he reacted quicker, and he didn't. And I wonder as well, and but the Postecoglou discussion fits into this. Like, are we moving away from this era of ideologue? I mean, because the last decade or so of football, greatly influenced by Guardiola, has basically been, and this is what I suppose I'm saying about kind of how the best run clubs are. They pick an ideology and they go all in on it. So every signing is so hence you can kind of like persist regardless of if the coach comes in. You have a squad that's tailored to that. But now I wonder, even though I think it's still Guardiola principles that sort of like shape the game. Obviously, there's been this discussion about that. Say Iraola allows his players to just dribble more than Guardiola ever would. And are we now moving away from these hard ideologues or dogmatic ideologues like Amorim to something that's actually a bit more pragmatic again, where yes, you have some core principles, but you need a lot of adaptation around them.
Yeah. Well, look, even Damien, you come in this. Even Guardiola, even at his most kind of stringent, if things weren't working, he looked for other answers. He'd go three at the back. He'd put John Stones in midfield. He'd try Kyle Walker underlapping, overlapping. Like with United, it's precisely the same thing over and over again. So, look, I don't want to be harsh on Amorim, but frankly, like, if he's saying I'm just sticking with this, unless the summer transfer window brings in about 16 new players, as you say, which it's not going to, I don't really know how it's tenable. Like, the strongest argument for keeping him is that United are just completely sick of sacking managers.
Break the cycle, that's the word, isn't it? The phrase.
I could imagine that the hiring process of Amorim, where the United courted him, and he said, I'm not interested. I'm doing great at Sporting. Life is good. Leave me alone. And United pressed and pressed and pressed. So now he's obviously calling all the shots, not just from a financial point of view, but he said to them, okay, I'll come, but these are the certain set of, circumstances I need, i.e. players. And I'm not changing. And they said, no, that's fine. We'll hire you. That's great. You come in and you do your thing because we want what you're selling, we want, right? And he thinks that if he flinches and does that pragmatic thing, he probably looks at all the previous other Manchester United managers that were made promises and told, oh no, look, just get us through this period and we will help you.
Yeah.
And the club don't. And then he's just worried about, okay, now I'm sacrificing my principles and like the club are never going to help me. Because even if I do manage to finish 5th or 6th or 7th or win the FA Cup, it's only more fuel to the ownership to go, well, why would we bother getting rid of Casemiro? We're semi-successful. So I think he's creating a hyper-intense environment where it's back me or sack me, okay? And he's daring them to, because that's what last night was. It was like, either you give me what you promised me and give it to me now, or I'm gone. But I'm not changing because otherwise I'll be on the hook to you guys for the rest of my life and then I'll end up going anyway. That's
a great point. To be fair, that's the best kind of logic I've heard anyone put forward for what he's doing. That makes total sense. Clock is coming against us. Miguel, in terms of fallout here, like you love it when family members take to social media, so that's going on with Garnacho. I don't know the specifics on it, but like that's always part of the fun. And then
Garnacho said after the game as well, of course, I don't know why I didn't play.
Okay. Okay.
And to be fair, I'm not necessarily, there's obviously a talent in Garnacho. Not necessarily his biggest fan, but he did make a difference, to be fair.
Yeah.
That lack of discipline, Joe, like, I can't understand like how if you've got good leadership in the changing room. I'm not talking stuff like that should not get to the manager, right? Your leadership group within the changing room should deal with that. Like he should be absolutely put up against the wall. Tell you and your brother that is none of your business. And next time you walk through the media zone, you shut up. All right. We all understand that you didn't play and you're not happy. And I get it, man, but suck it up. None of us are. And tell your brother to shut up as well. I mean, that's what would be said.
Yeah.
But there's obviously a vacuum there where he's allowed to get away with that stuff.
And then was Fernandez saying, I was looking for the video of it. I read quotes, Miguel, along the lines of like maybe they'll have to cash in. Obviously, there's big money on the table from Saudi Arabia. Maybe they will.
I mean, I think there's a bit of interest in. I heard there was something like 10 clubs.
Okay.
And PSG was a big one last summer that didn't happen. And this situation they're in there, if they want to rebuild, they actually have to think about this. They have to, and they're in the point now where really just because of where they are, almost everyone has to be on the table.
Miguel, you hear like Bruno Fernandes is for sale and whatever. Like, do you think that they're actively pursuing trying to get rid of him? That Amorim is behind closed doors said, look, he can't play. I play with too much structure. I play with too much discipline required to play in the positions that he can play in. And I don't think he can play in any of the positions. Joe, you may have said this before. Can't play as one of the two in midfield. Can't play one as the wide players tucking inside. He doesn't have the discipline from a technical or tactical point of view to do that. So are Man United actively trying to just move him on under the guise of...
With Bruno, I don't think, at least up to now anyway. And I think you're right about the kind of tactical element, but I think that's only because A, he's one of the few leaders in the dressing room, and B, he's basically bailed them out. They needed him in the circumstances because he will offer something different. I know from what I heard in January, they were really trying to force out, or not force out, that's the wrong way to put it. They were pursuing deals for like, or looking at who was interested in some players. I think people will be surprised by the Kobe Mainu one actually caused a lot of shock, but I think they would have been more than willing to do a deal with Chelsea. Look, we can see how Amorim uses them. But again, as you say, I wonder now this summer, does this change? Do they go and actively try and get rid of players just because? But then met with recruitment where they're actually, where basically, because United have to be lean and efficient now. And a £60 million deal for Cunha and potentially 40 million for the lap doesn't scream lean and efficient to me.
No, it's like I could watch Match of the Day highlights and scout those two. Do you know what I mean? There's nothing. They haven't unearthed a gem here.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Let's finish on a positive. I didn't realise you were at the FA Cup final, Damien.
Yeah.
You're messaging away about golf. You might have mentioned you're at the greatest FA Cup final of all time. It's like, I don't care how John Rand's looking. It looked amazing. I know from speaking to you once before about Palace, you're a big fan of Steve Parish. And this is maybe 5-6 years ago I was talking to you, and he was pivoting at the time and certain big names were moved on. Like it was around the time Wilfred Zaha went and you were like, no, there's a good, maybe at odds with United, a good like plan here, and there's going to be an investment in trying to hoover up the best young talent in South London, etc. They're onto a good thing. They have a good owner. Is that all ongoing? And I guess the weekend is icing on the cake.
Yeah, but Dougie Freedman's left now. When I think Dougie Freedman was the director of football, he's gone to some Saudi football club. And I actually met him at the cup final, and he was laughing because he said that like he's not just taking a football club, he's taking a sporting club. And he said there's like archery show. So like he goes, my remit now covers archery. So, obviously the football side of it is amazing, but like he's overseeing 8 sports that he's obviously got people in that report to him, and he's got to obviously learn. But I think that's part of his challenge. But Dougie did an incredible job for that football club in terms of recruiting the players, like Michael Olise, Eze, Gahey. Dougie has got a great eye for a player. When you look at their recruitment, so Palace's next step to replace him is obviously going to be huge. But like Munoz, Dougie found him, Lacroix at centre back, Richards. I mean, you go through the whole squad. I mean, it's just Wharton. Sorry, the biggest one of the lot, Wharton. Dougie always had a thing for him. When I spoke to him and realised that he was going to be what he is. So Dougie found all those. Right. So they need to find somebody to continue all that good work.
And do you, when you're like, do you have a professional sports, a curious thing? Do you have like a kind of emotional relationship with the club? Like, are you over the moon when they win at the weekend? Is it that kind of a thing for you? Do you feel it in your blood?
Yeah, absolutely. because when I signed for Crystal Palace Football Club in 2012, they were rock bottom of the Championship. And then I left as an established Premier League club and just after partaking in the 2016 Cup final. And I think any player's job responsibility is to come in and improve the football club, move it along, and then hope that those principles, the foundations that you laid, the people that come in afterwards can take it forward. So for those players to come in and move it further along than what we were able to do, was unbelievably emotional.
Right.
You know, I mean, it really was, because, you know, I feel I did 90% of the job, and then they're the ones that got the trophy over the line, you know. So it's that lineage or that attachment. And obviously with the likes of Dougie, Mark Bright, and Steve Parish as well, that are still there. Obviously Wardy, Joel Ward is there, and I think Julian Speroni is involved. So, you know, Paddy McCarthy on the bench as well. So like all those people are there for my time. So,
Right.
you know, we still have a group chat, and obviously Paddy got a great doing over for trying to headbutt the Man City staff.
Did he reveal any insights about that?
No, he didn't. But there's memes going in there of angry people, you know. So, you know, but I wouldn't get stuck in Paddy. I'll tell you that much for nothing. So, you know, and obviously, you know, then the group chats, you know, buzzing last night as well, because Miele won, and obviously, you know, Paddy got an FA Cup, and then Miele got a Europa League. So our group chat is still like, you know, floating along nicely today.
Nice.
So, like, yeah, listen, there's definitely an emotional attachment, and I love seeing it, and I love seeing the fans. You know, they are good fans, and they deserve that more than anybody, you know.
Nice. Okay. Fellas, brilliant analysis. Damien, thank you very much. Miguel, I know you're in Bilbao hanging out for the day, so we'll let you go and enjoy it. Thanks a million, fellas. That was great.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Cheers, lads.
There you go. That was the brilliant Damien Delaney and Miguel Delaney talking all things football. Our football coverage, as ever, was with thanks to Sky Sports. You can enjoy lots of exclusive live sport, including the biggest Premier League games every weekend. There is also every golf major, the 2025 Ryder Cup, every F1 race, Premier League darts, the Lions, of course, this summer, and much more. So you can watch on Sky Sports, or you can stream on Now. That is our football show for today. You can drop your emails in if there's anything we missed or you want to pick us up on to indosportpodcast@independent.ie.